Listen to the new Thin Green Line podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Game wardens John Norris and Wayne Saunders talk about wildlife, the outdoors, law enforcement, environmental subjects mixed with current events and guests that are part of the Thin Green Line. And if you are one of those visual people, like me, for $5 a month, you can see the actual podcast on patreon.com. Just search the Thin Green Line podcast on patreon.com and join us. The Pig Brewery in Lancaster, New Hampshire, is brewing traditional and innovative high-quality beers, as well as serving a large menu of creative comfort foods appealing to all walks of life, with daily specials sourcing many ingredients locally. Charitable involvement and support of their community is the cornerstone to the Pig Brewery's mission. Voted number 1 in New Hampshire by WMUR Viewers' Choice 2 years in a row, 2018 and 2019. Please join me at the Copper Pig.
We love our children. We protect them. We guide them. We prepare them for life in the world. With all that we do, from deep in our hearts, we cannot control all things. Life-threatening illnesses and disabilities affect far too many of our children each year. While we cannot change the circumstance, we can make dreams come true. Dreams to provide hope, to provide spiritual healing and strength, to provide moments of happiness and relief in the hardest of times. We can give a glimmer of light and hope in a time of darkness and despair. Join huntofalifetime.org to help make dreams come true, to provide hope for children with life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. Hunt of a Lifetime is a nonprofit organization fulfilling dreams for hunting and fishing trips to youth 21 and under with life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. Visit huntofalifetime.org to learn how you can make a difference.
This podcast is brought to you by Maine, Operation Game Thief, and Wildlife Heritage, a foundation of New Hampshire at nhwildlifeheritage.org, and International Wildlife Crime Stoppers. Please join me, Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and other game wardens on our adventures protecting wildlife, saving lives, and having fun, all while serving the public and the natural resources of our planet. Listen to the tales and experiences of those who work in the outdoors while being entertained with stories about encounters with poachers, wildlife investigation, murder investigation, near-death experiences, search and rescue missions, wildlife interactions from game wardens around the country and around the world. When I retired, I realized I couldn't let go of that legacy, but rather wanted to share the passion, the commitment, and the stories of those men and women that call themselves game wardens. This is Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and this is Warden's Watch. John, it's episode 41. And before we get into this episode, which is a very dynamic episode, we just got done doing a Thin Green Line podcast with Jason Piccolo. And man, I'll tell you, these people, they're just helping us understand what's going on in the world today is pretty relevant to the Thin Green Line. And you've known Jason for a long time, and it was just an honor to do that. So it's fresh on my mind. I have to bring it up in the Warden's Watch episode that the Thin Green Line, we're going outside of the Warden's realm and doing something different so people can listen to that. And we're going to focus on Warden's Watch with wardens and that fringe stuff. But Jason Piccolo, what a neat guy. Dr. Jason Piccolo, too.
Yeah, great guest, a lot of knowledge, been all over the country in law enforcement roles, and we won't give away the farm and for our listeners. But yeah, kind of extending the passion and the love and the importance of our great outdoors and our public safety outside of game warden circles, finding that all of these guys and gals that we have on the Thin Green Line podcast are kind of game wardens at heart, aren't they, Wayne?
Yes, you hit the nail on the head.
They all believe and feel the same thing. And when we get into our guest on this Warden's Watch podcast coming up, Jack Bailey.
Yes, Senator Jack Bailey.
And a senator, and when you think about our political environment right now, regardless of left or right, the more conservationists, especially from a game warden front, which we're a little biased on, that we can have in the political arena, the better for the Thin Green Line nationally on every level.
Yes.
Regardless of where you stand politically, right? Basically conserving those outdoor resources through experience. And Jack is such a passionate, vetted game warden, what he brings to the political arena through real on-the-ground experience and not just pushing a bill that was suggested by people on the ground like us man, it's just awesome. And what a great conversation we had there.
Boy, you hit the nail on the head to have somebody there, and even his colleagues, Democrat, Republican, reach out to him because of that experience, because of the know that he brings to the table on the Senate of Maryland. It was just awesome to hang out with him. He gave me a tour of the Capitol. He gave me a citation for my work in wildlife law enforcement and the ongoing stuff. I was down there for an Operation Game Thief fundraiser. I was a keynote speaker on, and it was just it was an awesome trip. And the guys in Maryland are just like every game warden. They're hardworking. They had great cases. It was good to hear that, and to have the support of a senator like Jack Bailey is just an awesome thing. And I really enjoyed this podcast. And he does a case that I believe is probably the most pivotal case, because striped bass on the East Coast is the ocean fish mostly targeted for sportsmen. It is it's an awesome sporting fish, and it all starts in the Chesapeake Bay. That's what the hatchery for these striped bass, and the case that he goes into turns the tides. It's pretty awesome. And I think if you're a striped bass fisherman, those early 2000s, you're going to see how they improved the fishery, and you're going to remember how it wasn't very good, and it got better and it got better. And it was because of the work of the Maryland DNR, as well as Virginia, and a lot of agencies working together on that. But he discusses that, which is just pretty cool to get the inside on a species that law enforcement had a direct relationship in bringing back from the brink of, I won't say extinction, but it wasn't good. It wasn't good. And to bring them back to where they are today it's just phenomenal.
Yeah, it's a great story, especially being such a prime resource management issue on your side of the country, man. So great content. Can't wait to see this one drop and have our listeners and viewers really enjoy that one.
Yeah, so here goes episode 41, Warden's Watch. So today's podcast is with Senator Jack Bailey from Maryland. And the awesome thing about Senator Jack Bailey is he's a former game warden. And that's very unusual, isn't it? Can I call you Jack, Senator? I feel like I should call you Senator every time I speak. So
no, Jack is fine.
Great. And we were talking earlier, Jack, about that it is rare, and you only know of 2 other game wardens that are actually in politics?
That's who I'm familiar with. Pete down in Texas is a state senator, and then in Colorado there is a state representative that was a former game warden. The only 2 others that I have heard of. But I'm gonna tell all your listeners we're represented very poorly, so we need more people to jump in. And it's not as bad as you think when you talk about politics.
No, and I think conservation issues are part of politics, and I mean, there's no better representation than getting a game warden involved in those, and I'm very happy you're involved. And we talked before about all the issues that from Second Amendment issues right through, conservation issues, especially where you're located in Maryland. There's a lot of conservation stuff going on. We talked about striped bass, the waterfowl that goes down to your area. It's what a crazy, great place to be a game warden, and B, to live. I'm jealous, Jack, because I've been there. I understand that country, and man, you get some serious waterfowl, and the striped bass fishing, the coastal fishing is just dynamite in Maryland.
We're very fortunate to have mountains in western Maryland and have a huge commercial offshore fishery out of Ocean City, and everywhere in between. We surround the Chesapeake Bay as estuary, and it gives us a lot of opportunity to work with not only the resources, but the public and the commercial industry that is based around the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah, that's a huge. It's the hatchery for the striped bass on the whole East Coast, right?
That's correct. It is. The Chesapeake Bay is the Atlantic coast striped bass, about 95% of those fish come from either the Chesapeake Bay, either some parts of Maryland or Virginia are the spawning grounds.
Oh, it's an awesome place. So, how many years, Jack, were you a game warden?
So I was a game warden, Maryland Natural Resource Police officer for 30 years, and I retired to my farm here in Southern Maryland, and then I was retired for 2 years, and then I entered the world of running for state senator, and I was elected, and so I have done that for 2 years.
Great. And you say it's not as bad as we all think it is.
Well, in being in public safety, we really do get the opportunity, and it's always rewarding to help people and to help things like the resources. Sometimes they can't speak for themselves, but when we're dealing with the legislature and we're talking about making rules, some of the rules that I've been able to get passed, some of them I took away, some really old, out-to-date rules that didn't make sense when I was an officer. And the other thing is trying to put some common sense into it. When we have discussions, we actually have people that have been out there. And in Maryland, in the Senate, there's 47 of us, and there's only myself that has any former law enforcement or conservation experience. So I do get to get up on the floor quite often and speak about, well, this is actually the way it is out there if you're on the bay, because there's a lot of people that want to help, and they want to provide a lot of new laws, and we're going to make it better. We're going to help the estuary. We're going to help the fish. We're going to help the animals. A lot of times they really don't bring a lot of factual information, and they don't work with the science behind it. Idea gets motivated, and it's like a snowball going downhill. Sometimes it can get away from us, and I'm sure that most of your listeners will understand that in a lot of states, it would be much easier if the politicians were out of creating rules and regulations that affect the resources.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's how it's set up nationwide, but that the department actually sets the rules for most places, but we have those that sometimes emotions get out. And I think of the mountain lion thing in California. They took it away from the department, put it in the hands of legislatures, and, consequently, they're not basing things on the science, which we're basing on emotion and getting elected. And that is a slippery slope that me and my co-host John Norris talk about all the time, the dangers of making these things emotional rather than, and political rather than science-based. So it's awesome to have you there and bringing that up. So, but I would like to get back to the history of Maryland, because it's got such a rich history. And after talking to Warden Bartles and his museum, it's I don't know of any other wildlife law enforcement agencies that have mounted cannons and machine guns to their boats. So, yeah, that's something.
I have to say, I grew up on the Potomac River, which separates Virginia and Maryland right into Washington, D.C. And back in 1868, when our enforcement department was started, it was mainly started just for the tax that they would get off of the oysters, and the fact that the oysters, they didn't want Virginia to get more money by selling the oysters and taking the oysters out of Maryland back to Virginia. That was a big part of what was happening, and this happened well into the mid 1900s, because when I started in the 1980s, some of the people that were my supervisors had actually been in gunfights with boats that were poaching oysters. And actually, one of the people that, one of my supervisors and his friend And actually, Roger ran a car dealership here because he was a young officer, and he went out there on the Potomac River, and they got into a gun battle over a boat from Virginia that was poaching oysters, and they were down behind the console when they were shooting over top, and the Virginia guys were shooting, and in the process, Waterman was actually shot and killed. And when Roger got back, I was down there actually as a young officer looking at a vehicle, and he was like, I was out there as I had your job for a little while. He said, but today we got in a gun battle over oysters. And he said, and a man got shot and killed. He said, when we came back to shore, he said, I decided that I was going to have a different job. And now his son, who's actually a friend and acquaintance of mine, he runs that dealership now. And we still joke about it that, his dad was out there, but he didn't want to be out there after that. And that is if there are some books, Oyster Wars of the Chesapeake Bay, that actually talk about the significance of this, and the fact that back around the turn of the century, the actual oyster buyers and some of the packers, they had the ability to mint their own money. That is how influential and important that was to our region and our area.
Wow. And we're talking, what's the time frame we're talking?
Well, we're talking around the turn of the century, around 1900 was when that was taking place.
Yeah.
Now, this gun battle took place in the, I would say, I went on in the 80s, and Roger had probably been not working for 20 or 30 years around the 50s or 60s, 1950, 1960s.
Yeah, because that's about the time frames that you guys were mounting cannons and machine guns on your boats.
They did actually have water-cooled machine guns on the front of the boats. So you can see how things are very cyclic. They definitely were not there during my career. A lot of times we were often referred to as being friendlier and needed to have much more compassion as we were dealing with people. But they did talk about the times when the machine guns were on the front of the patrol boats, and that was not that was just a time of normalcy. There was no extracurricular activity going on at that time.
Yeah, no, that's definitely different, because you're right. To see a machine gun was probably normal for them, and now it's not normal for us. And it is cyclic, because we're maybe not machine guns, but we're a lot more armed than we used to be. Probably during your tenure, because we are having issues, and with terrorism threats and things like that. So we definitely have armament, probably not out in the open, but available, or I hope they are available.
Right. I can remember, and I'm going to date myself here just a little bit, but when I started, we only had revolvers, and we did not have OC spray, or I can first remember when we got our first batons. We did not even have those. It was either you dealt with somebody with your hands, or the only thing you had alternative was a handgun.
No, absolutely, and I came on just as that was starting to change as well. But and that was, you're right. You had your handgun, and you didn't have anything else. No OC, no batons, no intermediate weapons. It was go hands on or shoot the person. So a lot of that has changed, as well as the training. But being in that striped bass zone, you've had a lot of work with striped bass, haven't you? Because that's and that's a resource for the whole East Coast. I mean, yeah, the hatchery, or the where the striped bass originate is that Chesapeake Bay area, but that goes from Maryland to Maine, and that's where they have a spawn, and we catch them up in Maine, and it's a resource for the whole East Coast, and you guys are kind of in charge of that.
Well, dealing with the nursery, we really have a big impact on every different state's ability to manage their resources. Because if we don't manage it correctly here in Maryland, it could negatively affect the economy of any one of the coastal states that also relies on the striped bass. Now, I would say that in enforcement, I did have a big part in dealing with a couple of very large conservation cases dealing with striped bass, one of the largest ever prosecuted through the Department of Justice, through federal court in Greenbelt. We did a case in the early 2000s. It was the IWTF, Interstate Wildlife Task Force. And when we did that, it was comprised of people from Maryland and people from Virginia. And then we also had, we were assisted by the Fish and Wildlife agents that worked in the area. And then the case was eventually prosecuted through the Department of Justice. And a small team of very educated prosecutors called ENRD, the Environment and Natural Resource Department of Justice that's out of Washington, D.C. And I'll tell you just a little bit about that case, because what we had was, with dealing with striped bass, you had every single state had different rules and regulations. Now, of course, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission gave the initial idea. These are the requirements that you have to follow, and then each state can set up their own. And each state had its own biologist that came up with their own regulatory process. And I think this is a good example of just how important a conservation officer can be. Because as conservation officers, we knew that there were problems with the regulations. And we knew that because of the financial incentive that a lot of people were making, whether it be this state or in other states, even in the markets, the commercial markets, whether it be in New York or California, the fish actually, everybody was making a lot of money off of illegal activity. And we tried to address it in the uniform fashion, and we tried to address it with a bunch of the biologists. And it was always, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard this, if that's really going on, prove it to us. It's really not. That's only happening, or about 10% of the people. They're just those bad eggs. They're the ones that are dealing with it. Everybody else is following the rules. So we started an undercover operation to try to deal with this so that we could determine just how big this case was. Mm-hmm. And working with the Fish and Wildlife Service, we did enough undercover work that we were able to show that this was much larger than just a little bit of just a few people, and that it dealt with some of the markets, and that it dealt with watermen both in Maryland and in Virginia that were utilizing the different start times, size limits, tagging requirements, etc., from one state to the other. And in the middle of the Virginia and Maryland, we also have the Potomac River. So you had three jurisdictions literally within miles of each other that had different requirements for if you wanted to take a striped bass, whether it be recreational or commercial. And so, of course, people with a financial vested interest were operating to their best advantage, and unfortunately taking advantage of our vulnerable fish species. Now, as conservation officers, we were monitoring the Young of the Year Index, and we were seeing that was beginning to crash in the early 2000s. Even though the biologists consistently said it's still a viable fishery, right? If we're here in the nursery and you can see that all of a sudden the Young of the Year is not going up, it's going down, there's going to be a problem in the future. So, and then it was always attributed, well, it was a bad year based on weather conditions, or that Young of the Year index that class that should have been there, that was impacted by that. That year there was bad pollution, or that year there was a lot of added runoff. So there was always an excuse. But as conservation officers, we felt that it was the fact that the fish were being underreported and taken illegally. Because it used to be that years ago, we actually, the state would have people that checked the fisheries and actually did the actual checking of the number of fish that were being recorded. Well, Maryland went to a self-reporting. And then we went to a fact that every fish had to be tagged, but with self-reporting and an unlimited number of tags. Actually, what it meant was they could just tag every fish they caught, falsify the numbers so that the numbers came back with what was the allocation, and everything would be okay. And everybody was making an extreme amount of money off of a vulnerable fish. And so as we did this case and we started to investigate many of the watermen involved, and we did a large number of watermen in the southern Maryland and the northern neck of Virginia area. Out of all the watermen that we investigated, we really only found 2 that were actually following the rules. Every other one was violating, now to different degrees. And it's just like when you see a group of speeders coming down the road, you can only catch so many. So we targeted the prosecution for 17 of those individuals and 3 corporations. Actually, it was a 5-week trial in Greenbelt in federal court and federal district court. Every single person was convicted of federal felonies. They all came in, told the judge exactly what happened and what they did. The fine and restitutions was about $1.7 million, and of all of the defendants, they all had some form of incarceration, home detention, some issue like that, all for just taking striped bass. Now, we've all made great cases where it comes up to that is very important. We catch somebody and we turn around and we walk out of court and we go back out and we get in our car and we go back to work to catch somebody else. The difference in this case that really we stayed with the Department of Justice and we tried to help them was we said, well, the reason that these people are doing this is because we have a flawed regulatory system. And that's just not flawed in Maryland or Virginia. It's flawed up and down the East Coast. Because when you deal with the federal system, you have something called proffers, where a person can come in and as they are getting ready for their sentencing, they can actually proffer and help themselves if they assist the government in telling us more things than what we already know about. So a lot of these individuals and these different people involved, whether they were in the case or around the case, became sources of information, and they explained to us the different states and what was going on. So we then took our show on the road and went to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries meetings, and we started talking to them about the federal regulatory system and what they did with states. And that's how, if many of your listeners, if they were involved with striped bass, each one of the states, their regulatory process. The reason that they changed it was because of the fact that the game wardens, the people that were out there seeing it every day, were able to get and bring forward what was actually happening. And the fact that self-reporting by people that were making a financial investment and interest in a resource might not actually be doing things the correct way. And so it changed up and down the whole East Coast, the reporting requirements and the way fish were allocated through the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And I'll have to say, you can see that there were changes made this year to some states, Maryland in particular, dealing with still reducing the recreational catch. And the whole reason that happened this year is in Maryland, we do not have the ability to record the actual recreational catch numbers that we have. So rather than doing it scientifically, we were simply doing it as a guess. And we need to take the guesswork out of regulations. We need to use scientific data. And by using scientific data, we can make very factual information and decisions for the future of our resources. So I'd have to say that that was definitely one of my larger cases. But I'll have to say we turned that right around. We rolled that right into another case on the Eastern Shore, and we did 4 more defendants over there that learned from what we were doing on the one side of the bay. They changed just a little bit on their side of the bay, and they started doing it again. And we caught them, and I want to say their fines were about $500,000 in federal court. We again prosecuted them in federal court, and we continued to change some of the rules and regulations, because that's one thing I would say about game wardens. When we look at how thorough some of the investigations that we perform are, we caught all those people, and we caught them with pieces of paper. The amount of fish that we actually saw was just in the very infancy stages of our investigation. Then we did everything on documents. We did a lot of subpoenas, a lot of search warrants, and we put our cases together based on their actual shipping records and the amount of fish that they actually sold. And I can't tell you how many times when we went up there to federal court and these people were looking at fines of hundreds of thousands of dollars, the defense attorneys that walked in and said, "Wait a minute, this is just a fish. You can't be serious." And I think that's what was so significant for me, was to see that it would have been as anymore in today's day and age. Sure, many of your listeners are dealing with criminal cases and criminal prosecution of crimes against people. A crime against a person where the person can come and say they're a victim is much easier to prosecute and to get a conviction than when you're dealing just with a resource, because not only do you have to educate the prosecuting attorney just to get him to take the case, but then you have to you have to educate the judge, and you literally have to educate the defense attorney to see the relevance of what their client or clients had been doing to harm the resources. So that is that's that. I mean, we definitely worked on some other cases in Maryland. We do have a large commercial fishery off the East Coast. I mean, people don't really know that when you look at Maryland, wow, we have a conch fishery, we have a lobster fishery, we have a tuna fishery, we have a scallop fishery. All those exist in such a small state as Maryland, but they bring such a large economic value to our state that we really have to pay attention to those resources. And we have worked considerably, whether it be with the Fish and Wildlife Service, or whether it be with NOAA, or officers from our surrounding states. when we worked with Delaware, when we're doing cases with horseshoe crabs, or when we're working up and down the whole East Coast, when we're dealing in the springtime with alvers. You never know what state you're going to be working with, but when we're dealing with these resources, of them are dependent upon all of us working together and sharing information back and forth.
Yeah, no doubt. And we saw the impacts of what you did all the way up the East Coast, which is, the striped bass were almost non-existent. And by implementing all those regulations that made sense, you turned a fishery around all the way across the East Coast from, Maryland to Maine. And it was that's quite a feat to affect so many people in so many different ways. And it's a big sporting fishery because a lot of people like to go out and catch them. They're a lot of fun to catch. You guys have a commercial fishery. We don't have a commercial fishery in Maine and New Hampshire, but it starts to get a commercial as you get closer to Maryland. And then a sustainable population is what we're all trying to get, and we're all trying to work together is the other thing. The watermen, the game wardens, the biologists, as I think we all have the same goals. Sometimes as individuals, we want different things. We want more money in our pockets as catching the fish, and that's where the problem exists. But when problems exist, like you are describing, big holes within regulatory things that people are taking advantage of everywhere, when you find out only two watermen are doing it correctly out of all the watermen you have, it's just crazy. So,
well, what I would say is I am actually acquaintances and friends with a considerable number of those watermen, and the fact is they learned from this experience and they changed their ways, because a lot of them were looking at it as just an individual situation. That, well, if I take a few of those extra fish today, that's really not hurting anything. But then when they saw how much each one was doing, and then they put it together collectively with what they were all doing, then they could see the impact. And so that was a big deal. Obviously, education, whether it be dealing with the, any of the users. And of course, we have down here in Maryland, unlike we have in a lot of issues, there's always a rift between the recreational and the commercial, because the commercial are like, well, all the recreational are out there doing it and they're unregulated, and then the recreational are like, look how much I spent for my boat, and I just want to go out and fish a couple times a year, and I can't ever catch any fish because look at all those nets and look at what the commercial men are doing. So there's always a lot of blame to go around. But I think the more we educate and we can help both sides see what the other one is doing, I think definitely helps for that to go back and forth, and we can work together.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a good goal, and you're right. Once they see, that they're looking at the long term, because that's their livelihood. So maybe today we take extra, but tomorrow there's nothing there because we're all taking a little extra now. So to make that change within the industry is a huge feat. So and then to affect the whole East Coast is something. So that's just great. Jack, can you give us one of your good game warden stories? Because people on Warden's Watch, they like to hear game warden stories, and I gotta imagine you got at least one, probably many in your pocket about working the job and having that, whether it's an investigation or catching that poacher, or and especially with a striped bass in and around that area, just it's a whole different scenario for a lot of people around the country to learn about striped bass and the economic impacts as well as the sporting impacts. And you were right in the heart of striped bass country. So, and just a good game warden story is always good.
Okay. So obviously I'm old enough that I remember the time before we had deer decoys. And so the first that got in our area, young officer, and I had one of my best friends, another young officer, corporal, who was in charge of our area. He had taken the night off, and we got some information about these people going to go spotlighting. Great idea. Take this decoy out and see if we can get them to shoot from the road. So we put the decoy out there, and this is long before we had many rules and regulations concerning how to establish it and where to put it. And I put the decoy in the road and on the side of the road in a field. He was up on the hill and as the stop vehicle, and the car came down the road and went on. And I thought, I don't think they saw that at all. I need to try to move that decoy just a little. Well, I ran across the road to move the decoy, and as I was moving the decoy, the car came back. And I simply was so worried about trying to catch the people that I didn't lay the decoy down. I stuck the decoy back up and just laid down in the field.
Right next to the decoy.
And yes, I was actually right underneath of it. And I said to my partner, I called him on the radio, and I said, "You need to. They're turning in the road. You need to come right now. Like turn the siren on. Do something so they don't shoot." And just about that time, the gun went off, and I'll have to say that slug at about 75 yards, going right over your head as it goes through that deer, is a very scary sound. And it right through the deer decoy. And I went, "Turn the siren on." He said, "I'm coming." I said, "Turn the siren on," because the only thing I could hear was that 870 from the guy going, "You missed, it's my shot," to his partner. And the guy goes, "Shh," and works the shell. And I'm like, oh my God, I hope this guy's a good shot too. So he shoots. Because what are you going to do? Stand up and get shot in the middle of it? So I'm laying there. So he shoots and again hits the decoy. And as I run down he stops him right down the street. And as I run down the road, I am thinking, we all go through a lot of thoughts in your, and of course at the time you're always thinking, I've got to do everything I can to catch the people. But that was one of them. But I have to say, when we took the decoy back to the corporal's house, who had gone through all the effort to get that decoy made, and here we show up, our story at all. Right, because he was sure hoping that he was going to be the first one to ever get a shot, and so we, but we did tell that story at both the guy that was stopping the car and my retirement, because I have to say that was self-imposed, and it was sort of a little bit of a crazy situation there, but it was it definitely was a little bit humorous afterward. Thank goodness nobody got hurt, especially me.
Yeah. Hope you had a change of pants in this cruiser.
I can tell you definitely learn. There's a young, well, he's not a young guy anymore, but he's a guy I trained, and we were. I just saw him the other day, and he was like, "You remember that night that I was moving that decoy and those people came and he said, I know they'd shot it if you'd have just let me have that decoy up. And you kept yelling at me on the radio, lay it down. And he said, it wasn't ever until your retirement that I heard that story, that I understand why it was so important to lay the decoy down if there was a car coming by and you were in the field on the same side of the road as the decoy, but there's definitely, there's, I can't tell you that a game warden that you run into that doesn't have some funny stories about confessions, or how many times the people did things the first time, and as we all know, it wasn't the first time they did it; it was the first time they got caught.
Absolutely, absolutely, you are 100% correct. Boy, Jack, yeah, that's something. That decoy story is pretty good story. I haven't heard one of those yet, but I did on one of the former warden's watches. We had Maine was using the decoy in the back, somebody's backyard. They actually caught him, night hunting out their back door using the decoy, which I thought was pretty brazen too. It's more than I wanted to, because I thought that same scenario that happened to you would happen to them. And I guess you don't have to be in somebody's backyard for that to happen, because there is that time from putting it up and moving that you're there, and you get halfway between the deer and the road or where you're going to be, and you either got to make that decision, run for your spot or run back and try to get that down in time. And
well, we were so excited to get because if they shot, not only could we get the fact that they had a weapon, but we could also get the fact that they had the loaded gun on the highway, which was an additional charge or additional ticket that you could write. And so that was always, back when you were a young officer, wow, they've got it's a great case because they shot. And so that was one of those things that we were always looking at, that maybe as we got a little bit older, we probably had a little more experience and realized, that really doesn't matter. So, yeah.
And I've never had anybody contest a decoy case either. And there is that adrenaline charge when you hear that gun go off and, apprehend that individual that violated. But yeah, and then usually they held their head in their hand because, they don't want to tell their buddies that they shot that fake deer. So that's, like I said, I'd never had one contested, so it was good.
Yeah. So I greatly appreciate all your time this morning. And what I would like to do, if that's okay, is as we approach some legislation in different areas, maybe be able to talk to you about that.
That would be awesome.
And to be able to talk about the future. And, in today's day and age, as we look at this pandemic that we're all facing, right, there is still a lot of question and of how did this get started in China? Did it come from a wet market? Is this really how this started? Because if this is, there's definitely legislation that potentially needs to be looked at in not only in the states, but in the federal level in the United States. And if that's the case, so that's definitely things that if you get questions about that I would be more than happy to discuss with you moving forward.
No, that would be awesome, Jack, to get your experience and, to talk about these discussions, because we know that there is a lot of laws that come out that affect wildlife that, again, are born out of emotion and not science. So whether that's, limiting coyote hunting, whether it's mountain lion issues, all kinds of baiting issues, and COVID-19 issues now. You're right, the illegal import of wildlife and how that started, that's definitely should be on the front of our radar, and we should be starting to address it as much as we can, if that indeed is where it came from. So, and certainly it's certainly a possibility. It's certainly a probable idea, and hopefully we can address these illegal wildlife issues, around the country and around the world. And having your opinion on legislation that is actually coming would be an awesome thing for Warden's Watch and our Thin Green Line podcast. So, thank you for offering your expertise in that. And thank you for your service as a game warden and as a senator, because it's so important to be involved in political issues that affect wildlife. I know year after year we have our hunters and our trappers and everybody descend on our state capitals to address issues, but to have somebody that has all that information and that knowledge being involved in legislation is just awesome. So thank you again for your service on both sides.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being with you today.
Please join me, Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and other game wardens on our adventures protecting wildlife, saving lives, and having fun, all while serving the public and the natural resources of our planet. Listen to the tales and experiences of those who work in the outdoors while being entertained with stories about encounters with poachers, wildlife investigation, murder investigation, near-death experiences, search and rescue missions, wildlife interactions from game wardens around the country and around the world. When I retired, I realized I couldn't let go of that legacy, but rather wanted to share the passion, the commitment, and the stories of those men and women that call themselves game wardens. This is Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and this is Warden's Watch.